Welcome to Spirit Reports of Life After Life. We're gathering every Sunday night at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we're live from Northern California, talking about spirit reports that we find in the second half of Heaven and Hell by Allan Kardec. So let us for a moment go back to what we've covered so far. We looked at what happens before, during, and after our transition. We all know that one day we will be leaving our physical form behind. And we learned right at the beginning during our first gathering that it is our soul that suffers. And it is through the vehicle, our physical body, but it's actually our soul that feels the pain. And we learned that we can actually help ourselves, our soul, experiencing less pain before, during, and after our transition by dematerializing our life, by de-emphasizing our materialistic inclinations. And we also learned that there is a state called the state of confusion, which sometimes starts already before our transition, lasts during our transition, and particularly is something we may experience after our transition. And that is something that can take years. Let us just imagine that. One of the spirits reported how extremely painful that situation is. And we learned one really consoling piece, and that is that we can actually do something about preparing ourselves for our transition to make it less painful. And that, we found out, is wonderful and good news, isn't it, dear friends? It's actually in our hands. And how many of you remember what we can do to prepare ourselves, to make it more effortless, easier? Yes, it was the inner transformation. As long as we work on our inner transformation, which will help us to live a life that is less materialistically inclined, we will actually reap the benefits at the very least during our transition. But we know that our inner transformation also helps us with our future lives, because it will put beautiful, nourishing seeds into our garden of life, our garden of eternity, and it's only us who will reap the beautiful harvest of those seeds that we will put into our garden. So in last week, dear friends, we looked at one of the spirit cases, and that was Widow Foulon. Widow Foulon was a special case. For those of you who were here listening to her spirit account, we learned that she did not have to go back to planet Earth after this incarnation, that she lived as Mrs. Foulon. And she was allowed to actually go to a happy world. How beautiful is that? Wouldn't we wish we could do that? Wouldn't we wish to not have to come back to planet Earth, perhaps? Well, she lived a very humble life, and she was always ready to help others. So these are signposts for us to keep in mind, to keep practicing and remembering. She also had a life peppered with sacrifices, and she took on all challenges with courage, resignation, and perseverance. So these are all virtues that are really, really important for us. So we need to take note. And then she used her time wisely in her life, and she recommended to us via her children that we should do the same. And we looked at a beautiful chapter in Jesus in Our Home, The Forgotten Gift, where Jesus as well reminded us that the gift we all have, the gift we're all endowed with upon our incarnation, is a package of time. And for some of us, it's only 20 years. For others, it's 60 years. And again, others, it's 90 years. But no matter how long the package of time, the gift we receive upon our incarnation for the coming lifetime, we need to use it wisely and for the good. And then we might not have to come back to planet Earth. She also taught us that when we're in spirit form, our soul being a spirit, the immortal spirit, then we actually feel more connected to our loved ones than before, because there's no more challenge of distance. And particularly if we're happy spirits, if we're more evolved spirits, then we can, like Mrs. Foulon, even visit our loved ones on planet Earth, because when we are more developed spirits, we have that capacity. The reverse is not possible. So dear friends, before we start with today's case, I want to say hello to all the lovely friends. Let me scroll up and see who they are. There's Tony. Hello Tony, thanks for joining. So nice to see you. Sol Souza, thank you dear friend for coming. Teresa Castro, thank you dear friend for coming as well. So lovely to have you. And there is Teresa saying, detach from material and elevate ourselves morally. That's it. That's exactly it, Teresa. Very nicely summarized. This is our lesson. And as we see, and we will be seeing in the future, it weaves through all the cases that we did discuss. There's Nora Brazil. Hello, dear Nora. Nice to see you. And Yvonne Medeiros. Hello. Hope we're all well. I would miss cardiac radio. Yes, Teresa. We are so grateful for cardiac radio, particularly all of us who speak English and not Portuguese. What a blessing. Thanks to our dear friend Vanessa Anzalone and all the good spirits on high and Jesus and God, this beautiful station was created so that we can nourish our soul 24/7, day and night. We don't even have to sleep anymore. We can always just listen to cardiac radio. Thank you. And then Vanessa. Hello, Vanessa. Nice to see you here too. Thank you for joining. Tommy Lou. Hello. Yes, dear friends. So let us begin with today's case, with today's spirit. And for those of you who have Heaven and Hell and would like to follow along, today we will be talking about Countess Paula. Countess Paula is on page 291. As usual, we're not reading the whole case because it takes a little too long, it's a little too wordy, but we're picking out those things, those messages, those guideposts, those road signs that we feel are most important for us to make shifts in our lives and hopefully prepare ourselves successfully for our future. So Countess Paula was a young, beautiful, and rich lady, born into an illustrious family. Moreover, she was a complete model of all the virtues of the heart and spirit. She died at age 36 in 1851. She was one of those individuals whose eulogy can be summarized by everyone as, "Why does God take such persons so early?" Dear friends, she was a young lady when she excarnated. She had it all. She was rich, famous, beautiful. She was royalty. And how do we deal with people who excarnate at a young age, who have everything and all of a sudden are gone from our perspective? Don't we ask ourselves, why does God allow this person to leave Earth so early? Well, let us go to the Gospel for a moment. We go to the Gospel, chapter 5, Blessed are the afflicted, on page 116. And let's see what we find on this subject in the Gospel. It is item 22, page 116. Chapter 5, Blessed are the afflicted. There is a chapter, it's called, If He Had Been a Good Man, He Would Have Died. and this is by the spirit Fenelon. Here we're learning the following. If he had been a good man, he would have died, right? It just so happens that God often gives to a spirit who is still budding on the paths of progress a longer trial than to a good spirit who, as a reward for its merit, will receive the grace of its trial, being as short as possible. Isn't that interesting, dear friends? So here it is confirmed. Actually, spirits who are complete, who are good spirits, who've done their work for this particular lifetime, are, so to speak, allowed to leave planet Earth. Whereas those who are only starting on their spiritual path, who are only starting on their road of progress, their lifetimes are often longer. We continue to read. The one who is departed has completed his task, whereas the one who remains perhaps has not even begun. Let us keep that in our hearts and minds, dear friends. So let us see. Understand, Fenelon tells us, that true freedom consists in deliverance from the bonds of the body. Because let us remember, our spirits are immortal, and our true life is the spirit life. So true freedom consists in deliverance from the bonds of the body, and that as long as you are on the earth, you are in captivity. So that is really important for us to remember, that actually being incarnated is a form of captivity. We've also read and heard before that we see planet Earth almost like a prison camp. We're here to undo past wrongs. This is a harsh place for us, for most of us. So to leave planet Earth is actually not a punishment. So in a way we have it a little bit reversed, don't we? We bemoan the ones who leave. It's almost like, oh no, I don't want you to leave this prison. You have to stay with me, right? It's more for selfish reasons that we suffer so much when somebody leaves us behind on planet Earth. But now we're learning that it's actually the reverse. Accustom yourselves, Fenelon tells us, not to criticize what you cannot understand, and believe that God is just in all things. Now that is very important for us not to ever forget. There are no mistakes, and God is all loving and just always. So let us move on. So Countess Paula was young, and she was allowed to leave planet Earth because it looks like she had completed her lessons. So it was a gift for her to be able to move on. She was good, sweet, and tolerant towards all, and was always ready to forgive or mitigate evil rather than increase it. So let us pause again. So we're reading that Countess Paula was sweet, tolerant, and good towards all. And she was always ready to forgive. Now that is something we want to look at a little bit deeper. And for forgiveness, because forgiveness is just so pivotal, so central for us to practice more in our lives. And it is one of our toughest challenges, isn't it, dear friends? It is never easy to forgive. So let us see. We're going to the Gospel, chapter 10. And that is Blessed are the Merciful. And we find on page 170, the following. There are two different ways of forgiving. Because, dear friends, there is forgiveness and there is forgiveness. And we want to do it right. And so let us see what we learn from the Gospel, to see that we can forgive well, that we do it right. So there's two different types of forgiveness. One is great, noble, truly generous, without ulterior motives, delicately sparing the self-esteem and susceptibility of one's opponent, even when he or she is completely to blame. So, in order to forgive correctly, we need to be very sensitive. We need to be humble, and we need not cast any blame. Because remember, dear friends, in all situations, if we point the finger, 3 fingers always point back at us. So there is never a good time to blame anyone for anything that happens in our lives, and particularly not when it comes to forgiveness. So here's the second type of forgiveness now that kind of stands in contrast to the first one that we want to practice, namely being noble, truly generous, kind, non-blaming. The second one, by which the offended person, or the one who thinks he or she has been offended, because that's another thing, imposes humiliating conditions on the other person and makes him or her feel the weight of a forgiveness that angers instead of pacifies. So, dear friends, let us be the ones who forgive with gentleness and kindness, humbleness and no blame, so that the other person does not feel at fault and feels put down and angered by our action of forgiveness. There is no generosity in this second type of forgiveness. It is only a way to satisfy our own pride. And we know that pride is the father of many vices, and also the denial of many virtues. So we do not want to foster any pride in us, because we also have learned that selfishness and pride are in our way of being truly charitable. And forgiveness is part of the definition that the good spirits gave us in the Spirits book. Because the illuminated spirits in the Spirit book answered the question that Allan Kardec asked, what is charity, or how can we define charity? They said it's benevolence, indulgence towards the imperfections of others, and forgiveness of trespasses by others. So forgiveness is a form of charity. So let us see, we're going to page 176. We're staying in the Gospel, and we continue to educate ourselves a little bit more about forgiveness, because it's just so important. So here we learn from Simeon, who is another spirit, on page 176, forgive, be indulgent, charitable, generous, even lavish with your love. That is a pretty strong statement, isn't it, friends? To be lavish with our love. Give because the Lord will repay you. Forgive because the Lord will repay you. Abase yourselves because the Lord will lift you up. Humble yourselves because the Lord will sit you at his right hand. And that is the other thing. We're putting, again, beautiful, delicious tomato seeds into our garden when we forgive in a humble, charitable, generous way. Because God will recognize our efforts to be more charitable. And most likely, our opponents, so to speak, will feel appeased as well. So there is no losing. There is only a win-win by forgiving in a charitable way, in a kind and humble way. Forgiving one's enemies is to ask forgiveness for oneself, for ourselves. Now that is from Apostle Paul. And this is on we're still in the Gospel according to Spiritism on page 177. So he starts his section by saying, forgiving one's enemies is to ask forgiveness for oneself. Now why would he say that, dear friends? He is essentially telling us that when we forgive, by forgiving others, we're actually asking for forgiveness for ourselves. Well, first of all, we know that it is not only up to us to forgive, but we know that we have done some wrong as well. And there is very most likely quite a few people out there over our lifetimes who may struggle with forgiving us. So by giving forgiveness, we receive it. Like in everything else, by giving, we receive. What we put out comes back to us. And remember, dear friends, when we look at the Lord's Prayer, remember when we say, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. It is the same thing. Here Jesus suggested to us that we can only be forgiven to the degree we have forgiven. So it is actually pretty brilliant the way Apostle Paul starts his expose on forgiveness. Then he says, true forgiveness, the Christian kind of forgiveness, is the kind that casts a veil over the past. It is the only kind that will be credited to you, for God is not satisfied with appearances. Do not forget that true forgiveness is recognized by actions much more than by words. So, the Apostle Paul tells us that we need to actually model our behavior more so than going to someone and saying, hey, can you please forgive me? I'm sorry for this and that. And however, we approach the other person humbly and with good intentions and being kind and casting with the intention to cast a veil over whatever happened. It is more important that we actually lead with our actions, so to speak, that we walk our talk. And we're reminded of the book Thought and Life by the Spirit Emmanuel. And I think it's in chapter 13, Children, where he speaks of the inductive power of our actions, which is more important than words. So in other words, when we raise our children, the most inductive power is our actions, more so than words, and words and speech is more so than our thoughts in that particular case. So let us remember that, dear friends, that let us lead with our actions. Let us remember that, because through our actions, we know, we prove, we show to the other that we've truly forgiven, that we've, so to speak, fermented that sentiment in ourselves to the point that we can actually model it. It's really beautiful, isn't it? So that is forgiveness. And of course, there is so much more on forgiveness. But we're always a little bit pressed for time. So we will leave it at that. I'm very much interested in your input and in your additions. Feel free to post it. And I just saw something Soul is saying. First of all, there's Alicia Ramos. So nice to see you, dear friend. And Soul is saying, studying Spiritism, I've learned to forgive myself and others who hurt me. It takes time sometimes, but it is possible. You don't need to be friends or be with them, but you can pray and wish them good thoughts. Exactly, Soul. That is so wonderful. You're putting it together. You're summarizing it in the most beautiful way. And thank you for this contribution. It is important for all of us to hear it this way. And you're saying one thing that is very, very important. And that is that all forgiveness, of course, starts with our own self-forgiveness. Forgiving our own selves. Particularly when we do the nightly review or we review our lives, we often find moments where we say, oh, I wish I hadn't said that. Oh, I wish I hadn't done that. And it starts by forgiving ourselves that we can actually reach out to the other and make amends. Thank you so much, Soul. And so let's see. So let's continue. forgive. So she was good. We're back to Countess Paula. Page 291 for those of you who are just joining right now in Heaven and Hell. And it is a happy spirit. We're still with the happy spirit. And Countess Paula is ours today's spirit we're looking at, we're learning from. So she says she was good, sweet, and tolerant towards all, and she was always ready to forgive. And now we know how to forgive and how important forgiveness is. Then it continues. Slander never stained her lips. Dear friends, another very important reminder to not speak badly behind people's backs. That is a habit that a lot of us have that is very painful. Painful all around. There is no winning. What we put out again comes back to us. There was a post on Facebook I recently saw, and it said something very poignant. It said, slander dies when it hits a wise person's ear. And what I really enjoyed about that as well is we can't control other people's slander, right, friends? We can only work on our own inclination or lack thereof. However, we can support the other person who is slandering by not listening, or let's put it this way, by putting an end to it. Because only if our ears, so to speak, are open and we take it in and maybe even agree and then pass it on, we make ourselves guilty and we're supporting this other person's actions. So we can actually do something when slander reaches us. Right, dear friends? So it says, slander dies when it hits a wise person's ears. So let us remember that as well. We can always change on both sides. So slander never stained her lips. So Countess Paula had learned that lesson already. Without being haughty and prideful, she treated those below her with a benevolence that displayed no mental familiarity. And she never set herself apart from them with airs of superiority or humiliating condescension, understanding that those who make a living from their work are persons without means, and that because of their condition and in order to sustain themselves, they need the money owed to them. She was never late in paying wages. So let us pause, dear friends. First of all, we're learning that here is a rich, famous, beautiful countess, royal lady, who had the capacity to not be slanderous, to not be prideful or haughty. How often do we find that kind of behavior under those circumstances in our world? So she was very evolved, we assume, we gather. And she never showed any superiority. That is quite challenging when you're in a position like her. Wouldn't you think, dear friends? It is easier to not be haughty and superior when we're more average people. But in positions like that, it is very difficult because we're also dealing with all those people who put us on a pedestal, who idolize us, which is, by the way, never a good thing either, because we're actually, by idolizing people, we're actually not helping their spiritual growth because we're supporting their pride. So, but Countess Paula didn't have that fault. And so she also realized that anyone who works for money needs the money. They don't do it for fun, right, friends? We're all working because we need the money. And so she was so considerate in finer details that consequently she always paid those who were working for her on time because she understood that they needed the money. Very considerate. Then we continued to learn. She could not understand how it could be in good taste for the wealthy to accumulate debt. And she would feel disgraced if anyone could have said that her suppliers had to grant her an advance. Hence her death brought much grief, but no claims against her. Friends, let us pause again. Countess Paula teaches us something very important. She is telling us that she thought it was in poor taste for all of us, including her, who are wealthy, to accumulate debt. Friends, most of us do accumulate debt, right? And we're not judging, but we're saying that most of us who are accumulating debt believe we need the things that we need to indebt ourselves for. And so let us look at the Spirit's book for a moment. Let us learn a little bit more about that. We go to page 415 and we're looking briefly at the law of preservation. Our dear sister and friend Carol Correa does beautiful presentations on the laws, the divine laws, and she was just talking about the law of preservation. So if you guys would like to know more about it, just listen to her presentations. I think they're on Saturday afternoons. They're wonderful, very educational. So we're going to page 415 and we're looking at question 720. So here Allan Kardec wisely asks the good spirits, do voluntary privations, so voluntary poverty, which have as their aim an equally voluntary expiation, have any merit in God's sight? So, does voluntary poverty has any merit in God's eyes? Let us see what they're saying in the second part of the question. First of all, the answer to this is, do good to others and you will have greater merit. And that is something that Paula, Countess Paula, modeled. She did good to others. But in the second half of the question, are there any meritorious voluntary privations? We learn a little bit more that helps us to understand why she did not support for people to go into debt. So are there any meritorious voluntary privations? The answer is yes. The privation of meaningless pleasures, because it frees you from matter and elevates your soul. Merit means resisting the temptation that drives you to excess and the taste for useless things. And it means taking from your own necessities in order to give to those in need. That is challenging, isn't it, friends? So essentially, good spirits tell us that we ought to make a strong attempt to spend less. And the money that we spend less on ourselves, because we're observing whether what we're spending on is frivolous or possibly even out of our own greed, is recommended for us to give that extra money, the money that we save from not overspending on ourselves. We are suggested to spend that money on the needy. So in other words, we're invited to not purchase everything that we think we need. That we start pausing when we have the urge to spend money on frivolous things like an extra pair of shoes or everyday, maybe even the cup of coffee that we could do at home. We're not criticizing, we're just giving examples. We all make our choices, so that is not the point. We're just bringing some examples. Or maybe there is a way to go on vacation and do the good. Or that extra dress, or whatever it is, we all know it, right? Maybe we can stop ourselves and not spend the money on that, but we're even invited to do more. The money we save, that we actually put that aside to give to the needy. So I know our dear friend Vanessa Anzalone always does this beautiful therapeutic question, which I I allow myself to borrow from her. I would like for us, if we can, close our eyes and pause for a moment and ask ourselves, on a scale of 1 to 10, where are we in our spending habits? Are we going into debt because we believe we need so many things? How often do we spend even money on food that we then toss out? I just heard a report that 30% of the food that people buy in the United States goes in the garbage. Maybe we can get at least a chicken or two and give it to them. But that's a high percentage, right? So where are we on a scale of 1 to 10 in frivolous spending? And not only that, and then giving the money we don't spend to the needy. You don't need to share the number. I think it is important for us to recognize where we are, and I would like to suggest that in the weeks to come that we could possibly invite you to look at our spending habit and follow Countess Paula's advice, because it will help us. This is one of the steps for us to dematerialize our lives, to spend less energy, time, and money on consumer products, on more and more, but rather help the needy. So let us see. We also are reminded of Mr. Sanson, who was a few weeks ago the spirit we looked at, and he taught us something similar. This is what he said. You should know one cannot enjoy a lot of things without depriving others of their well-being, thereby morally committing a great evil. So this, Mr. Sanson's lesson, actually, that we're bringing back, actually supports the importance of us to watch the dollars we're spending and where we're spending them. Dear friends, let us go back to Countess Paula. Page 292. Her charity was inexhaustible. Another good guidepost for us to have inexhaustible charity in our lives. It was a charity of the heart and not of ostentation. Only God knew about the tears she wiped away and the desperation she relieved. She especially knew how to find hidden misfortunes. These were the most desperate, and she helped them with a delicacy that raises rather than lowers self-esteem. Let us pause again. Let us look at the charity of the heart and not of ostentation. The charity that helped with delicacy, raising others rather than humiliating them. Let us go back to the gospel. How beautiful that we have the gospel. We're so grateful to Alan Kardec for codifying Spiritism and these beautiful books that have so much to offer. Just if we're just sticking with them, right? You see that we're just working off the foundation of Spiritism. So Gospel, chapter 13, and we actually looked at that last week. It was on 4th of July when we talked about charity with one of the cases. And we're looking at it again because we can never get enough of charity, right, friends? That's one of the key things, and we know forgiveness is part of that. But here we're looking at the right type of charity. Page 216, item 3. Doing good without ostentation. Remember, Countess Paula was charitable without ostentation. That's why we're looking at this. Doing good without ostentation holds great merit. Hiding the hand that gives it even more meritorious. It is an incontestable sign of great moral elevation. For in order to view things from a higher state than the ordinary, one must look past the present life and identify with the future life. In other words, one must place oneself above humanity in order to renounce the satisfaction that seeks to be witnessed by others and to wait for approval from God. Those who prefer others' approval to God's approval show that they have more faith in others than in God, and that the present life is worth more than the future life. Dear friends, we could make it another therapeutic question, right? There are so many. And we could ask ourselves how often we are capable of doing the good and not wanting some kind of appreciation, acknowledgement of our good actions or deeds. So here we're invited very clearly to not look to others for any recompense, but rather have trust and faith in God. God knows. And to give non-ostentatiously is our goal. And where are we at in that? We may ask ourselves for a moment again, how capable are we to give without ostentation and without getting anything in return? A friend of mine, long time ago, always said to me, and that was way before I came across and studied Spiritism. He said to me, if you expect something in return when you give something, it's a business deal. He was right. It's only not a business deal. It's really only charity when we don't ever expect anything in return. So, page 223 on the same subject in the Gospel. And this is still part of chapter 13. Do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. There is on page 223 the Spirit's teaching. And this Spirit teaching is from Sister Rosalie. And it's called Material Charity and Moral Charity. And as I said, it was about a week or two ago where we looked at this already via another case. Let us love one another and do unto others what we would want them to do unto us. So the golden rule is a form of charity. And she says, you who are rich, think about this a bit. Help unfortunates as much as you can. Give so that one day God will repay the good you have done. She says there is the moral charity, which consists in giving support to one another. And it is what you practice the least on the low order world where you are incarnate for now. While the material charity, where is it? We're staying with the moral charity. So the moral charity consists in giving support to one another, and we on earth are having a hard time with that. Of being kind, benevolent, indulgent with others, and as we learned last week, the true charity is the charity of benevolence. Benevolence meaning goodwill towards all, and without needing any recompense, without needing any cheer from anyone, recognition. So she continues to say, keep quiet and let a more ignorant person speak, which is one example of moral charity. Knowing how to return a deaf ear when mocking words escape is another form. Not paying any attention to the smirk of disdain is yet another example. But it is also a smile. It is a pat on the shoulder. It's a compliment. It is an encouraging look. It's so many little things that we can use to be more morally charitable. And we're invited to incorporate that more into our lives. And then we continue on to page 224, and this is from a protective spirit. And we're still learning about charity. And of course, there is so much more to learn about charity, and we're just picking a few things to embellish what Countess Paula is teaching us. So here we learn charity, my friends. the protective spirit, says in 1860, may be practiced in many ways. You can practice charity in thought, word, and deed. So another very important item. So this casts a light on charity yet in another way. In thought, by praying for the forsaken poor who have died without having even seen the light. A prayer from the heart will console them. So in thought, we can always connect with God and pray. Even if we can't help a homeless person. And I recently learned that the more PC, politically correct word these days, a home-free person. Not homeless, but home-free. It gives it a little bit of a different twist, maybe more positive and supportive. But we can always do a silent prayer whenever we see hardship or hear of hardship, even listening to the news. So a prayer from the heart will console them in words. So there's charity in words, by providing your everyday companions some good advice. By saying to people who are desperate to help them to see another perspective. So dear friends, again, we can be charitable in many different ways. One is in thought through prayer, word through prayer, and of course encouraging words. And in deeds is when we reach out and we actually act charitably. So dear friends, charity. Let us incorporate more and more charity into our lives every single day. So now we continue on. Countess Paula managed to avoid ruinous wastefulness and superfluous expenditures. Let us remember she was very wealthy, thereby enabling her to reduce by half what others might have spent without doing nearly as well. She was thus able to save a large part of her fortune for the needy, having destined a large share of her resources exclusively for this purpose so sacred to her. She regarded it as a reduction in what she would otherwise spend on the upkeep of her household. Hence, she found a way of reconciling her societal duties with her duties towards the needy. How beautiful, friends. So she didn't even spend all the money that was at her disposal, but she cut it in half. And she actually modeled charity in the deepest form. She didn't only cut her expenses, as we looked at it later, that we may want to do more of, but actually using the money that she didn't use on herself and her societal duties on the needy. Let us pause again and let's look at that one more time. Let us go to the Gospel, page 218 again, chapter 13, which is such a beautiful chapter. Do not let not your left hand know. Do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. And we're going to page 218. And there we find the story of hidden misfortunes. The story of hidden misfortunes is something that I invite you to read if you'd like to understand it a little bit better, but we will try to humbly just summarize it in our own words so we can understand how it actually relates to Countess Paula. There is a footnote after what we just read, that she's saving half of her money to give to the needy. One could say that this lady was a living portrait of the charitable woman described in the Gospel according to Spiritism, chapter 13. And that is the chapter, Do Not Let Your Left Hand Know What Your Right Hand Is Doing. And it is the story of this lady of rank and nobility. And I'm sure you guys have heard it before. She would go every night dressed in very humble clothing to go to the poor and the needy with her daughter. And she would help anyone and everyone with whatever they needed in a very uplifting yet humble, non-ostentatious way, just like Countess Paula. And she would take her daughter with her, and her daughter wanted to help. And she was such a wise teacher to her daughter that she said to her, if you want to help the poor and needy, then it needs to come from yourself. Because if I provide you, if I make those things and you give them to them, it's really not based in your own merit. So she invited her daughter to make her own things, to provide those things that came from her own merit, to the needy. And one day, one of these people that she was serving every night came to her court, came to her residence of nobility, maybe it was a castle, and saw her and was surprised because nobody knew who she was. And all she said, shh, don't tell anyone. Now that story, I can't do it justice, is so beautiful and so heart-touching. And in reading that, we understand better how Countess Paula was such a noble spirit of helping the poor by depriving herself of some money, some things, and giving all of that, the money she saved, to the needy. I am so touched by that. There is so much to learn, right, friends? So let's go back to Countess Paula. So she was evoked 12 years after her death by a relative who accepted Spiritism. And here's what Countess Paula tells us. I want to see. Oh, Sean. Hello, Sean. Nice. Thank you so much for joining. So lovely to see you. Gabriel Ignacio. Thank you, dear friends. Yes, we have a lot to learn, right? So here's what Countess Paula said 12 years after her passing. And again, we're not reading it all. We're just picking out certain things. She's telling us that she's super happy. I am happy beyond anything you could imagine, despite my being still far from the highest plane. I used to belong to Earth's fortunate ones, for I don't recall having experienced any real sorrow. And let us remember, she was royalty, rich, famous, beautiful. She had it all. From the earthly perspective. So youthfulness, health, wealth, and praise, all of those things she had. I had everything that comprises happiness among you. But what is such happiness compared to what may be experienced here? Here meaning in her spirit life, in the spirit life. What are your most splendid galas, where people display the most valuable jewels, when compared to the assemblies of spirits who shine with a light that your eyes could not bear? Friends, let us imagine the beauty of that. The eyes that sparkle more than the galas of the rich and famous that we already think are so sparkly, right? And what are your palaces and golden halls before these aerial dwellings, the vast field of space laced with colors that would pale the rainbow? What a beautiful picture. What are your narrow horizons full of clouds before the grand spectacle of worlds around in a limitless universe under the almighty hand of the Most High? Friends, we can't even imagine, right? And we love our nature. We love the clouds, the sky. We love beautiful buildings, lots of sparkliness. We love it all. And yet, let us remember there is more. And we will see it if we follow God's laws. And we learn them from these spirits. Here everything breathes of love, trust, and sincerity, Countess Paula reports. Here meaning in the spirit life where she finds herself. Here everything breathes of love, trust, and sincerity. Everywhere there are loving hearts. Everywhere we see friends. Nowhere is there envy or jealousy. This is the world in which I dwell, my friend, into which all of you will undoubtedly arrive by following the morally upright path. How encouraging and consoling. She also tells us each spirit has its mission in the spirit life. To fulfill wards to protect, friends to visit on earth, processes of nature to oversee, suffering souls to console. There's a coming and going, but from one world to another. We meet, depart, and then join one another again. We assemble at a certain point and share what we have done. We congratulate each other on our successes. We consult and mutually assist one another with difficult cases. Finally, I assure you that no one has even a second in which to become bored. So she's painting a picture of busyness. Everyone has their task, and everyone does to fulfill their next step in their evolution on the other side. So, dear friends, it looks like a lot of cooperation and collaboration with lots of love, trust and sincerity, no jealousy and envy. It touches our heart. It is something we can look forward to. It is a blessing to hear about that, right, friends? It makes it so much easier for us to be inspired, to follow God's laws, to be charitable, to use our time wisely. Yes, friends. And then we too may experience this beauty that she describes to us. She says, at present, the earth is our main concern. So the present she's referring to is the middle to the end of the 19th century. So we're talking a time before the First and Second World War. But I would think even today it would be the same thing. I don't know, I can't judge, but I'm saying it still sounds very appropriate. So at present the earth is our main concern, she says. What a multitude of spirits rushing towards the earth to take part in its transformation. The designs of providence must be accomplished, she says. That is why everyone is at work. I did not arrive at my, and then she continues to say, so we're at the end of page 295. So what we're hearing and what we're learning is the spirits on the other side all have their jobs. There is no boredom, and it's all they're doing more good. And at this point where she's reporting, there's so many phalanges of spirits rushing to the earth to help it in its evolution. And we can imagine that this is still valid today. Then she continues to say, teach us one more important lesson. I did not arrive at my present position in the spirit life without a struggle. Another very consoling piece of information, because most of us have struggled or are struggling. So now we know she was struggling as well. Over many lifetimes, she says, I passed through the trials of labor and poverty, which I had voluntarily chosen in order to strengthen and purify my soul. She's hinting at the fact that we may have a say in how our lives look like. Some of us may have that liberty to pick lessons for our own soul growth. She definitely did, as she reports. So she picked some very harsh lives, filled with labor and poverty, in order to strengthen herself. So if we're experiencing that kind of a life today, let us remember and let us know that it is for our own good. We're strengthening ourselves. And then she says something interesting. I had the pleasure of emerging victorious from those trials. So she came out on top of that. But I had yet to undergo one more, the most dangerous of all. Dear friends, what do you think that most dangerous of all trials she had to still undergo? And she picked for this lifetime. Yes, you're right. It is wealth. Wealth and material well-being. A well-being without any bitterness. That is what comprised the danger, she says. Before attempting it, I desire to feel strong enough not to succumb. Let us pause, dear friends. Actually, let us continue the rest of this paragraph so we get the whole picture. So she picked the most difficult lesson and kept it for last. The lesson, the trial of being wealthy. Then she says, many spirits are seduced by appearances and rush to choose wealth. What disgrace befalls them? Too weak to confront the dangers of wealth, they allow material seduction to triumph over them in their inexperience. That in itself, without pausing, without looking deeper, more depth into what she's teaching us and telling us, can we see ourselves in that? Are we wanting more money? How often are we praying to win the lottery? How often do we envy the rich and famous because they have so much? Now we know, dear friends, let us not rush into that, because it is the harshest trials of all. To educate ourselves further, we want to go to the Spirit's book for a moment, and we go to the law of equality, which is on page 455 in the third part of the Spirit's book, which is the divine laws. Page 455, law of equality in the Spirit's book. First book that Allan Kardec codified. Well, I'm in the wrong book. No wonder I can't find it. Too many books. Page 455. I apologize, friends. Okay, but we're getting closer. Here we are. We have arrived. So this is the law of equality. And we're going to question 814. Why has God bestowed wealth and power on some and poverty on others? Very good question. Very good question. And this is what is so consoling about Spiritism. It actually, Jesus brought it to us, but I want to say the way it was codified so clearly, because we understand how it all fits together. So now we don't have to mope for the rest of our lives that we don't have money, right? If we don't have money. So in order to test everyone differently. So the question is, why has God given some wealth and others poverty? In order to test everyone differently. Moreover, as you know, such trials are chosen by the spirits themselves, and they often fail at them. Friends, we must have chosen our lives, in terms of wealth at least. So, no one to blame, not to be unhappy, but to be grateful for what we have. So let us go to question 816. If the wealthy endure more temptations, don't they also have the means at their disposal for doing more good? Good question. And here the illuminated spirits help us. So if the wealthy endure more temptation, if that's the harsher trial, then they can also do more good, right? That is precisely what they do not always do. And that is why Countess Paula is teaching us that we need to be strong. We need not to rush into wealth and fame, into this so-called good life from our earthly perspective, because it's not an easy life. Because the potential to do wrong with that is huge. So that is precisely what you do not always do, namely making good use of it. They become selfish, proud, and insatiable. And that reminds us of Countess Paula reminding us, or not reminding us, teaching us to ideally not go into debt, to not overspend. An elevated position in the world and authority over our fellow beings are trials, as great and risky as misfortune. For the wealthier and more powerful we are, the more obligations we must fulfill, and the greater are the means at our disposal to do good and evil. Friends, so next time we get a promotion or more money or more of this or more of that, let us remember it is an increased obligation that we receive. And the dangers of not making good use, to not use it for the good, is great. So let us really take that to heart. We could make that another therapeutic question and ask ourselves, where are we at that? But let us move on, because our time is running out. Wealth and power beget all the passions that attach us to matter, and they keep us from spiritual perfection. That is why Jesus said, "Verily I say to you that it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven." And in the very first evening we spent here on Kardec Radio, looking at what helps us to allow for an easier transition to get to a better place on the other side and also help us with our future lives is to dematerialize our lives, to work on our inner transformation, our soul perfection. And here we're going full circle, being told that our passions, our spending habits, our material inclinations keep us shackled to this world and make our future more difficult. So let us be patient and grateful for what we have and make good use of what we have. So to wrap up, the Countess says, "Workers, I'm in your ranks. I suffered privations and passed through harsh trials, and that is how I developed the virile forces of my soul. If I hadn't, I would have undoubtedly failed at my last trial. Like me, you will also have to go through the trial of wealth. Through the trial of wealth." We're saying it again. But don't rush to ask for it too soon. You who are already wealthy, always keep in mind that true fortune, imperishable fortune, cannot be found on the earth. And understand at what price you can merit the grace of the Almighty. Dear friends, with this we wrap up tonight's gathering. I'm so grateful for everyone having been here. There is so much to learn for us. We're so grateful for these wonderful spirits and Alan Kardec wrapping it up into such a digestible form, in such a clear form. So dear God, dear Mother, Father God, beloved Jesus, Alan Kardec, and all the beautiful spirits who availed themselves to help us in our struggles on planet Earth, to guide us, to be the guiding light in the thorn bushes that we experience at times, to give perspective to our lives, to keep us oriented towards the eternity, to nourish our souls, to remind us that our inner transformation, our soul growth is the most important, to remind us that there is more than the material life on this planet. There is more than living in this body. And if we negotiate this beautiful life that is gifted to us with so many beautiful years of time to make the most of it, that we will experience a graceful and positive transition into a beautiful time of life after life. And with so much gratitude for everything that we have received in our lives, with gratitude for Kardec Radio and all the good spirits, we humbly and kindly ask for permission to close tonight's gathering. And with this, my dear friends, and so much love and gratitude, till next week, Sunday, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Take care. We love you. Bye.